You know those strange noises you sometimes hear in the dead of night when the rest of the world has fallen silent? They are the subtle sounds that prick at the edges of your awareness, the little creaks and groans that your rational mind scrambles to explain away. Maybe it's just the wind rattling an old window frame, or a branch scraping against the roof, or, I don't know, the house itself settling on its foundation, exhaling the day's tensions. We tell ourselves these stories, these logical explanations, because the alternative is far too disturbing to contemplate. We need to believe that the sounds are benign, that they are part of the normal, predictable symphony of our living space. It is a necessary comfort we grant ourselves. But what if those comforting explanations are wrong? What if the soft little scratches that echo from within the walls are not the frantic scurrying of a mouse searching for crumbs? What if that unsettling, persistent feeling of being watched, that cold prickle on the back of your neck when you are alone, is not just a fleeting moment of paranoia? This is a fear that taps into something deep and primal within us all. It is the fear that our senses are not deceiving us, but are instead warning us of a truth so horrifying that our minds instinctively recoil from it. The fear that we are not, in fact, truly alone. This is a fear that transcends culture and time, a universal dread that speaks to our most basic vulnerabilities. From a young age, we learn to check under the bed and in the closet for monsters, a childhood ritual born from the understanding that darkness can hide things we do not want to see. As adults, we may laugh at these old fears, confident in our locked doors and secure windows. Yet the fear lingers, a dormant seed in the back of our minds, waiting for the right conditions to sprout. It waits for that one inexplicable sound, that one shadow that seems to move on its own, to remind us of how little we truly know about the spaces we inhabit. Imagine lying in your bed, cocooned in blankets, listening to the familiar rhythm of your own breathing. Then, another sound joins the quiet, a soft thump from the attic above, a faint shuffle from the hallway just outside your door. It is a sound that does not belong, an alien note in the familiar melody of your home. Your heart begins to beat a little faster, your hearing suddenly sharpens, straining to catch it again. You tell yourself it is nothing, just your imagination running wild in the dark. But a small, cold voice whispers a terrifying question. What if it isn't? For most of us, our home is so much more than just a physical structure of wood and brick. It represents our sanctuary from the chaos of the outside world. It is the one place on the entire planet where we believe we can let our guard down completely, where we can lock the doors and feel a profound sense of safety from whatever dangers might be lurking in the shadows beyond our property line. This idea is deeply ingrained in our collective psyche. The home is a fortress, a haven, a personal kingdom where we are the sole rulers. It is where we are our most vulnerable, our most authentic selves, protected by the simple yet powerful belief that we are secure within its walls. The terrifying truth, however, is that sometimes this deeply held belief is nothing more than a fragile illusion. The real danger is not always outside, waiting to break in. Sometimes the most insidious and horrifying threats are the ones that are already inside, coexisting with us in silence and secrecy. They are the dangers that have slipped past our defenses completely unnoticed, embedding themselves into the very fabric of our lives without our knowledge or consent. This chilling reality shatters the fundamental concept of home as a safe space, turning the one place we trust into the epicenter of our deepest fears. It is a violation of the most intimate and personal kind. There is a specific name for this uniquely terrifying phenomenon, and it is called phrogging. The term itself sounds almost whimsical, but the reality it describes is the stuff of nightmares. Phrogging occurs when a person, an intruder, secretly moves into your home and manages to live there completely undetected. They become a ghost in your own house, a silent squatter who survives by exploiting all the hidden, forgotten spaces you would never think to look. They might inhabit your dusty, cluttered attic, the dark and damp corners of your basement, a narrow crawl space under the floor, or, in the most profoundly terrifying cases, they might live inside the very walls that surround you every single day. This is not a creature from a horror movie or a monster from folklore. This is a human being, a stranger, living a parasitic existence just inches away from you and your family. They hear your conversations, they watch you as you sleep, and they learn the intimate rhythms of your daily life. They become an invisible, ever-present observer, turning your private moments into a spectacle for their own secret viewing. The concept is so disturbing because it attacks the very foundation of our sense of security. If we cannot be safe in our own homes, protected by locked doors and solid walls, then where in the world can we ever truly feel safe again? Tonight we are going to delve into this primal fear, exploring a story that will make you question every creak and groan your own house makes. The story you are about to hear is about a young woman named Madison. She is at a joyous and hopeful point in her life, having just moved into her very first home. It is a place she has worked and saved for, a symbol of her independence and the beginning of a new chapter. However, this beautiful dream, filled with the promise of peace and security, very quickly begins to curdle and transform into a living nightmare, a horrifying ordeal that she could never have possibly imagined in her darkest moments. Now, it is important to understand that Madison's specific story, as we will tell it, is a composite narrative. It is a carefully constructed account designed to allow us to walk through this particular brand of horror step by agonizing step, to experience the escalating dread as she did. But while Madison herself is a composite character, the elements of her story are terrifyingly real. Every unsettling event, every moment of creeping fear, and every piece of escalating evidence that something is terribly wrong is inspired by and directly mirrored in the documented cases of real people who made the horrifying discovery that they were not alone in their own homes. Their terror is the foundation of this narrative. Therefore, the story of what happened to Madison is a chilling tapestry, woven together from the threads of true documented terror. Each strange noise she dismisses, each object she finds mysteriously moved, and each gut-wrenching moment of realization is a reflection of an actual event that has happened to someone, somewhere. We are drawing from a dark well of real-life cases that prove this is not just an urban legend or a campfire tale designed to spook teenagers. It is a real and devastating form of psychological violation that leaves its victims scarred in ways that are difficult to comprehend, shattering their perception of safety forever. So, as you listen, remember that the monster hiding under the bed is just a story we tell to children, a fictional beast that can be banished by turning on a light. It is a manageable fear, one we can easily outgrow and dismiss as fantasy. But the man in the walls, the silent, hidden observer sharing your space, breathing your air, and watching your every move from the shadows of your own home, that is horrifyingly real, and it is a chilling reminder that the greatest threats are sometimes the ones we can't see, hidden in plain sight. Our story begins with a dream, a powerful and relatable aspiration that I am sure many of us have shared at some point in our lives. For 26-year-old Madison, that deeply cherished dream took the form of a small, two-bedroom bungalow, its exterior painted in a cheerful pale yellow with crisp white trim that made it look welcoming and bright. The house sat on a quiet, tree-lined street that felt like it belonged to a completely different universe, a peaceful world away from the cramped and noisy city apartment she had been sharing with two roommates. This house was more than just a building. It was a testament to her hard work, a physical manifestation of her independence. This place was finally, unequivocally, hers. The journey to this moment had been a long and arduous one, paved with sacrifice and discipline. This house was the direct result of years spent diligently saving every spare penny she could. It was built from the wages of countless double shifts she worked as a freelance graphic designer, fueled by late nights and endless cups of coffee. It was the product of packing her own lunch every single day instead of buying it, and of politely declining nights out with friends to keep her savings goals on track. So, when the realtor finally placed the keys in her outstretched palm, the cold, solid weight of the metal felt less like a simple tool and more like a hard-won medal, a shiny symbol of her victory. Of course, the house was not without its imperfections. It was far from a modern marvel of construction. Built in the late 1940s, it possessed all the charming and sometimes frustrating quirks that are characteristic of an older home. The original hardwood floors creaked in a way that Madison actually found quite endearing, as if the house were whispering its long-held secrets to her with every step she took. One of the bedroom doors had a tendency to stick whenever the air grew humid, requiring a firm shoulder to open, and the plumbing system would occasionally shudder and groan dramatically when she turned on the hot water tap, a noisy protest from its old pipes. She began to compile a mental list of all these little idiosyncrasies, not viewing them as flaws that needed immediate correction, but rather as integral parts of the home's unique personality. This old house, she thought, had character, a history etched into its very bones, and she was genuinely excited about the prospect of getting to know every single one of its groans and creaks. It was a relationship she was eager to begin, a slow and steady process of learning the language of her new sanctuary. She looked forward to understanding its rhythms and making them her own, completely unaware of the other hidden life that pulsed within its frame. The first week in the new house was a whirlwind of activity, a chaotic but satisfying blur of half-unpacked cardboard boxes, the sharp, clean smell of fresh paint, and that specific kind of pleasant ache that settles deep in your muscles after a long day of moving heavy furniture. With meticulous care, she began to unpack the contents of her life, transforming the empty rooms into a space that reflected her. She arranged her beloved collection of books on newly built shelves and hung framed photographs on the walls, each one a memory finding its new home. Every single nail she hammered into the plaster felt like a definitive statement, a small but powerful declaration. This is my space. I am the one who belongs here. I am safe here. She spent blissful hours in the small, slightly overgrown backyard, her hands covered in dirt as she pulled up stubborn weeds and dreamed of the vibrant garden she would soon plant. She envisioned rows of tomatoes, fragrant herbs, and colorful flowers blooming under the summer sun. Her new life felt like it was taking root right alongside the future plants in her garden. She even had the chance to meet some of her neighbors. A friendly elderly couple from across the street, who welcomed her with a still warm apple pie, and a young family next door whose children's joyful laughter she could often hear drifting over the fence. Everything about it felt absolutely, wonderfully perfect. The house wasn't just a place to live, it was a canvas for her future. Madison carefully planned out each room, imagining cozy nights spent reading by a future fireplace and dinner parties with friends in the dining area. The spare bedroom, which she had designated as her home office, quickly became her favorite spot. She set up her desk to overlook the backyard, allowing her to watch the birds and squirrels as she worked on her design projects. This house was not just a financial investment, it was an emotional one. It was the foundation upon which she planned to build the next, more stable and peaceful phase of her life, a quiet haven all to herself. This initial period was a honeymoon phase, not just with the house itself, but with the very idea of homeownership. Every small task, from changing a light bulb to figuring out the recycling schedule, filled her with a sense of accomplishment and pride. The house was her responsibility, her project, her creation. She was the mistress of this small domain, and the feeling was intoxicating. The quiet street, the friendly faces, the solid roof over her head, it all combined to create a powerful sense of belonging and security. She was exactly where she was meant to be, blissfully unaware that her idyllic new reality was built on a foundation far more fragile than she could ever imagine. In the weeks that followed, Madison settled into a comfortable and deeply satisfying routine. Working from home meant her days were filled with a placid, productive quiet, the house providing a peaceful and uninterrupted soundtrack for her creative process. The gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of a passing car, the chirping of birds outside her office window, these were the only sounds that punctuated the silence. In the evenings, she would cook dinner for one in her quaint little kitchen, often with the windows thrown open to let in the cool twilight air. She would then curl up on her new couch, watch movies, and feel a profound sense of peace settle over her. For the very first time in her adult life, she was completely and utterly alone, and to her own surprise, she absolutely loved it. After years of navigating the complex social dynamics of roommates with their conflicting schedules, shared spaces, and constant low-level noise, this solitude felt like a luxury. The silence in her house was not empty or lonely. To Madison, it was full of possibilities. It was the sound of her future unfolding, the sound of her own thoughts taking shape without interruption. It was the beautiful, calming sound of her new life, a life lived entirely on her own terms, and she treasured every quiet moment of it. She quickly became a connoisseur of her home's unique acoustics, learning to identify every sound the old structure made. She knew the specific tone of the refrigerator's hum as it cycled on and off, the gentle, rhythmic tick of her grandmother's old mantel clock in the living room, and the particular sigh the floorboards in the hallway made when she stepped on a certain spot. These were the sounds of home, the house's familiar and comforting voice. They were predictable, they were constant, and they were hers. They wrapped around her like a warm blanket, reinforcing the feeling that she was safe and protected within these walls. Madison truly believed that she knew this house intimately, right down to its very bones. She had explored every room, opened every closet, and learned its every quirk. But a house, much like a person, can have secrets buried deep within its structure, hidden from view. And Madison was about to discover that her charming, quirky little bungalow was hiding a secret of the most terrifying and unimaginable kind. The comforting, predictable sounds she had come to know and love were about to be joined by new ones. Sounds that did not belong. Sounds that would slowly, methodically, and piece by agonizing piece begin to unravel her sanity. It all started so small, so insignificantly, that you would have barely even noticed it. It began with a faint scratching sound. Madison was in her home office, deep in concentration as she worked on a deadline when she first heard it. The noise was subtle, a dry, scraping sound that seemed to be coming from inside the wall right behind her desk. She paused her work, tilting her head to listen more closely. A mouse, she thought immediately. A perfectly logical explanation. It was a common issue for an older house, nothing to be alarmed about. She made a quick mental note to pick up some traps on her next trip to the store, and then promptly went back to work. For the next few days, the sound would come and go, always faint, always brief. It was a soft, skittering noise, the kind you might expect from a small rodent moving between the studs. It was always in the same spot, just behind her workstation, and it never lasted for more than a few seconds at a time. It was the kind of minor annoyance that is incredibly easy to dismiss, to file away under the category of old house problems. It was just another quirk, another part of the building's character, and she gave it very little thought, her mind preoccupied with unpacking the last of her boxes and settling into her new life. Then, about 2 weeks after she had moved in, the second strange thing happened, something a little harder to explain away. She walked into her kitchen one morning to make coffee, and noticed that the cupboard door above the counter was slightly ajar. She stood there for a moment, a flicker of confusion crossing her mind. She knew with absolute certainty that she had closed it firmly the night before. She was obsessive about little things like that. It was part of her tidy nature to always close doors and drawers. She shut it securely, feeling a little unsettled. Was I really that tired last night, she wondered? Maybe I just forgot. It was a small thing, a tiny blip in her otherwise perfect routine. But it was a blip that planted a tiny seed of doubt in her mind. She tried to push the thought away, telling herself she was just being forgetful or overly anxious in her new surroundings. After all, what was the alternative? That the door had opened on its own? It was a ridiculous notion. She chalked it up to the house settling, or perhaps a faulty hinge. And yet the image of the open cupboard door lingered in her memory, the first truly discordant note in the peaceful symphony of her new home. It was a quiet, unsettling prelude to the cacophony of fear that was to come. A few days after the mystery of the open cupboard, something happened that was, honestly, significantly harder to ignore or rationalize away. Madison came home after a trip to the grocery store, her arms totally laden with bags filled with fresh produce and household supplies. As she walked through the front door, she was immediately struck by this strange feeling that, well, something was off. You know that specific sensation, don't you? The air in the house was perfectly still, the rooms were quiet as they always were, but a distinct and unsettling prickle of unease ran up her spine, making the small hairs on her arms stand on end. It was an instinctive feeling, a primal sense that her territory had been disturbed in some way. She put the groceries down on the floor and began to walk through the house, room by room, her senses on high alert. Nothing seemed obviously out of place. The furniture was exactly where she had left it. The windows were all locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. And then she saw it. Sitting innocently on the kitchen counter, right next to the wooden bowl where she kept her fruit, was a single, generic brand can of tomato soup. It was a can of soup she knew for a fact she did not buy. It was a can of soup that she most certainly did not place there on the counter. Her heart began to beat a little faster, a frantic rhythm against the sudden, heavy silence of the house. She just stood there in the middle of her kitchen, staring at the can as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. Her mind raced, desperately trying to conjure a logical, plausible reason for its presence. Had a neighbor dropped it off as a belated welcome gift? No, the doors had been securely locked and no one had a key. Was it a forgotten housewarming present from a friend? No, she had meticulously unpacked every single gift and box. The silence in the house suddenly felt less peaceful and more threatening. With a hand that trembled slightly, she reached out and picked up the can. It felt cool and solid in her palm. Just a normal can of soup. The sheer absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. She told herself that she must have bought it and simply forgotten, that it must have been in one of the bags from a previous shopping trip. She had to have. It was the only explanation that allowed her to maintain her grip on reality. Wanting it out of her sight, she quickly shoved it into the very back of the pantry, trying to forget the chilling, inexplicable feeling it had given her. But the unsettling incidents started to add up, forming a slow, creeping accumulation of things that were just fundamentally wrong. These were small, isolated events that on their own could be easily dismissed, but when viewed together, they began to paint a deeply disturbing picture. One particularly chilly night, Madison woke up shivering uncontrollably. The digital thermostat in the hallway, which she distinctly remembered setting to a cozy 70 degrees before going to bed, was now glowing with the number 62. The cold air in the room felt invasive. Blaming a faulty wire or a glitch in the old system, she got up, reset it, and tried to convince herself it was just another old house quirk. Then came the smells. They were faint, almost ghostly, but undeniably present. Sometimes, when she walked into the living room, she would catch the distinct, stale odor of cigarette smoke. Even though she had never smoked a day in her life and despised the smell, it would hang in the air for just a moment before vanishing completely, leaving her to wonder if she had imagined it. Another time, as she was reaching for a spare blanket in the hallway closet, she caught a whiff of something else entirely. A musky, unwashed scent that seemed to emanate from near the attic access panel in the ceiling. When she sniffed the air again, it was gone. These sensory enigmas began to chip away at her confidence, making her feel like she was losing her mind. She started to second-guess everything she did, every memory she had. Did I really close that door all the way? Am I absolutely sure I didn't move that book from the coffee table to the shelf? Am I just imagining these smells because I'm stressed? This insidious self-doubt is a classic and devastating component of this kind of psychological invasion. The victim is manipulated into distrusting their own reality, their own senses, which makes them feel isolated and unstable. She was becoming a prisoner of her own uncertainty. The feeling of peace she had once cherished in her solitude was slowly being replaced by a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. She found herself on edge all the time, jumping at the normal sounds the house made, the very sounds she had once found so comforting. Her friends started to notice a change in her. She was withdrawing, frequently canceling plans to stay home, as if she felt a subconscious need to stand guard. But guarding against what exactly? A quirky old house? A non-existent mouse? A faulty thermostat? Or was she guarding against the terrifying, nameless fear that was steadily growing in her mind, the chilling fear that she was not truly alone? The psychological toll of this slow unraveling was immense. Madison found her thoughts constantly circling back to the strange occurrences, trying to piece them together into a narrative that made sense. But no matter how she tried, the pieces wouldn't fit into any logical puzzle. The world she had built for herself, one based on order and predictability, was beginning to fracture. This internal battle was exhausting. During the day, she would try to be rational, telling herself she was overreacting, that there was a simple explanation for everything. She was just tired, overworked, and maybe a little lonely in the big, quiet house. Her mind was simply playing tricks on her. But at night, when the sun went down and the house was draped in shadows, the fear would return with a vengeance. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the pipes, was no longer a charming quirk, but a potential threat. She started leaving lights on in rooms she wasn't using, a subconscious attempt to banish the darkness where her anxieties thrived. She would lie awake in bed for hours, her ears straining in the silence, listening for any sound that was out of place. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures and watchful eyes, leaving her more exhausted in the morning than when she had gone to bed. Her work began to suffer. As a graphic designer, she needed a clear and focused mind, but her concentration was shattered. She would find herself staring blankly at her computer screen for long stretches, the cursor blinking on an empty page, her mind replaying the image of the soup can or the scent of stale smoke. She missed deadlines for the first time in her professional career, offering vague excuses to her clients about not feeling well. She felt a deep sense of shame about her inability to function, which only added to her feelings of isolation and distress. The sanctuary she had bought to foster her creativity had become a source of profound mental paralysis. This erosion of sanity is a key feature in documented phrogging cases. The intruder's goal, whether conscious or not, is often to remain undetected, and the victim's self-doubt is their greatest ally. By creating a series of small, inexplicable events, The Phrogging can make the resident question their own perceptions long before they ever suspect an intruder. The victim might blame forgetfulness, stress, or even the supernatural before considering the unbelievable truth. For Madison, this period of self-doubt was a crucial stage, a fog of confusion that kept the horrifying reality hidden just out of view, allowing the presence in her walls to remain undisturbed. Madison's home was invaded by phantom smells: cigarette smoke, greasy fast food, and a musky organic odor near the attic. The scents appeared suddenly, vanishing before she could trace their source. Each new smell was a violation, a sign of someone else's presence. She tried to rationalize, maybe a dead animal in the attic, but the odors were never constant. In real Phrogging cases, unexplained, shifting odors are often the first sign, ghostly clues that someone is living just out of sight. These fleeting scents whispered a horrifying truth. Madison was not alone. The noises in Madison's walls changed. No longer the light skittering of a mouse, but slow, deliberate, human-like shuffling. She pressed her ear to the drywall, straining to hear a cough, a sigh, the rustle of fabric. The sounds migrated. Floorboards creaked above her bedroom at night. She told herself it was just the house settling, but deep down, she knew better. In true Phrogging stories, this shift from animal-like to unmistakably human sounds marks a terrifying escalation. The house was no longer just settling, it was being occupied. Madison's sense of security was shattered. Madison's dread echoed real-life horror stories. In 1941, Theodore Coney's, the Denver Spiderman, secretly lived in a family's attic for months, undetected until tragedy struck. The family heard strange noises, noticed missing food, and felt a growing sense of wrongness, until the truth was revealed. Madison didn't know these stories, but she felt the same anxiety and fear. Her dream home had become a trap. The terror was real, and it was closing in. The breaking point came late one night. In the dead silence, Madison heard a muffled, unmistakably human cough from the hallway. Frozen with fear, she realized the sound was too close. Inside her house, she forced herself to move, heart pounding toward the source. The cough had come from the low air vent in the hallway wall. The impossible was now undeniable. Someone was inside her home. Madison crept toward the vent, terror and curiosity warring inside her. Another sound, a throat being cleared, came from just behind the metal grate. She crouched, hands shaking, peering into the darkness. This was no animal, no trick of the mind. She had to know the truth. Every step brought her closer to the reality she feared most. Someone was hiding in her walls. Madison leaned close to the vent, the musky odor now overwhelming. She peered through the slats. At first, only darkness. Then a glint, an eye, staring back at her. It was human, vacant, and terrifyingly real. Madison recoiled, horror flooding her mind. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. She knew, without doubt, she was being watched from within her own home. The horror of that single moment, of making direct eye contact with a person who has been secretly and silently watching you, is an experience that is almost impossible to truly imagine. It is a violation so profound it rewrites your understanding of the world. But this nightmare, Madison's nightmare, is a horror that has been made terrifyingly real for others. In 1986, a teenage girl named Tina Bowen and her family in Massachusetts lived through something just as chilling. For months, they had been hearing strange noises and witnessing inexplicable events in their home. Objects moved on their own. They were convinced their house was haunted. The truth, they would discover, was far more terrifying than any ghost. A 17-year-old boy named Daniel LaPlante, who had developed a disturbing obsession with Tina, had used his knack for breaking into houses to find a hiding spot inside a narrow, hidden space within their walls. From this secret vantage point, he systematically terrorized the family. He would drink their milk directly from the carton, change the channels on their television, and write taunting messages on the walls. His reign of terror finally came to a dramatic end one night when he emerged from his hiding place, his face painted and carrying a hatchet, and took the family hostage. Tina and her family managed to escape with their lives, but the psychological trauma of the discovery was immense. The realization that their ghost was a flesh and blood person, a boy who had been living just inches away from them, watching them, listening to their every word, was a violation beyond comprehension. For Madison, that same violation was now a horrifying certainty. The eye in the vent confirmed everything. The scratching noises, the can of soup, the thermostat, the strange smells. It all snapped into place with a sudden, horrifying clarity. Someone had been living in her house with her, watching her, for weeks. Her paralysis finally broke, shattered by a massive surge of adrenaline that shot through her system like lightning. There was no more room for doubt, only the instinct to survive. She had to get out, now. She scrambled to her feet and just ran. She did not grab her phone, her keys, or her purse. She ran in her bare feet and thin pajamas, her fingers fumbling clumsily with the lock on the front door. The click of the deadbolt unlocking sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. She threw the door open and sprinted out into the cold night air, not stopping, not looking back, just running toward the distant, welcoming glow of a streetlight. The sanctuary was breached. The dream was over. Madison ran until her lungs felt like they were on fire, her bare feet slapping painfully against the cold, unforgiving pavement of the quiet street. She did not dare to look back, terrified that a figure might emerge from the shadows of her own front porch. She only stopped when she was safely bathed in the sickly yellow light of a distant streetlight. Her body bent over as she gasped for air, shaking uncontrollably from a combination of cold and pure, unadulterated terror. From this distance, she finally risked a glance back at her little yellow house. It looked exactly the same as it always did. Peaceful, quaint, asleep. But she knew the monster that was awake inside its walls. Her mind was a chaotic storm of panic and horrifying images, but a single, clear thought cut through the noise. Call the police. The bitter irony was that her phone was inside the house, along with her keys and her purse. She was locked out of her own home, and in that moment, she had never been so profoundly relieved. Her gaze darted around the sleeping neighborhood, landing on her neighbor's house, the one belonging to the kind, elderly couple who had brought her the apple pie. Hope surged through her. She ran across their manicured lawn and began to bang on their front door, her fists making a frantic, desperate sound in the dead of night. Lights flickered on inside the house, illuminating a window. A moment later, a man's worried voice called out from behind the door, asking who was there. Through a torrent of tears and ragged sobs, Madison managed to choke out just 2 words, a plea that carried the full weight of her terror. Call 911. The door opened to reveal the concerned face of her neighbor, his wife standing behind him clutching her robe. They quickly ushered her inside, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm as they took in her disheveled state. Pajamas, bare feet, and a look of primal fear in her eyes. The minutes that followed were a blur of flashing blue and red lights that painted the quiet street in strokes of emergency. Madison sat wrapped in a thick, comforting blanket on her neighbor's floral couch, trying to recount her story to a patient, calm police officer. She knew how utterly crazy it all sounded. She could almost see the flicker of skepticism in his eyes as she spoke. A hysterical woman, awakened in the middle of the night, talking about mysterious noises, phantom smells, and a single, terrifying eye she saw in her air vent. He asked her gently if she had been drinking, if she was on any medication. She just kept repeating, "There's an eye. I saw an eye." 2 of the officers, a man and a woman, finally approached her house. They moved cautiously, their expressions serious as they surveyed the scene. They found the front door still standing wide open, a silent invitation into the violated space. With their guns drawn, they entered the house carefully, their voices echoing in the quiet as they announced their presence, calling out into the seemingly empty rooms. From her vantage point at the neighbor's living room window, Madison watched them disappear inside, her heart pounding with a sickening mix of dread and a desperate need for validation. The next few minutes stretched into an eternity of agonizing silence. The silence from the house was deafening. She imagined them sweeping through the rooms, finding nothing out of the ordinary, and coming back to tell her that it was all in her head. That old familiar self-doubt, the one that had plagued her for weeks, came rushing back with a vengeance. Am I crazy? Did I imagine it all? Did I have some kind of waking nightmare? The thought that she might have fabricated the entire ordeal was, in some ways, almost as terrifying as the alternative. It meant that the threat wasn't in her walls, but inside her own mind, an enemy she could never escape from. Then, the quiet street was filled with the sounds of more sirens. Another 2 police cars arrived, their tires crunching on pavement, followed shortly by an unmarked detective's car. Something was happening. This was no longer a simple wellness check. The first officer, the one who had taken her initial statement, came back across the lawn to the neighbor's house. His entire demeanor had changed. The professional skepticism was completely gone, replaced by a grim, somber seriousness that made her stomach clench. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady, "you were right. You were absolutely right. We found it." What the police discovered inside Madison's walls was a scene of unbelievable filth and terrifying, meticulous obsession. They methodically traced how the intruder had gained access. A small, overlooked maintenance vent on the roof had been pried open, likely months ago. From that single point of entry, the man had navigated the dark, dusty crawl space and the narrow, claustrophobic gaps between the wall studs, creating a secret network of passages throughout her home. But it was in the main attic space, located directly above her own bedroom, that they found the horrifying heart of the operation. They found his nest. The space the police uncovered was a small, disgusting burrow that defied belief. A filthy, stained mattress, which they later determined had been stolen from a junk pile in a nearby alley, was laid out on the dusty floorboards. This was where he slept, just feet above her own bed. Scattered all around this makeshift bed were the remnants of his secret life. Empty food containers, crumpled fast food wrappers, and several large plastic bottles filled with urine, a testament to his commitment to remaining hidden. The air was thick with the same musky, unwashed odor that had haunted Madison for weeks, now overwhelmingly strong. But it was the collection of her personal belongings that turned the scene from a squatter's den into a stalker's shrine. Arranged with a disturbing sense of order was a small, curated collection of her things. There was a coffee mug from her kitchen, a brightly colored scarf she had been missing from her closet, and a novel she had just finished, taken from her nightstand while she slept. And then there were the photographs. Dozens of them, all taken with a cheap disposable camera. Photos of her sleeping, photos of her working at her desk, photos of her watching television on the couch, all taken from above, through tiny, almost invisible holes he had drilled in the ceiling, or through the slats of the air vents. This kind of deeply personal violation, the discovery of a secret living space within one's own home, is a recurring and horrifying nightmare in the world of true phrogging cases. In 2019, a student at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, identified in news reports only as Maddie, kept noticing that her clothes were missing from her closet. She and her roommates joked about having a ghost. One day, she heard a strange rattling sound coming from inside her closet. Thinking it was a raccoon, she called out, "Who's there?" To her absolute horror, a man's voice answered, "My name's Drew." She opened the door to find 30-year-old Andrew Swafford sitting on the floor of her closet, wearing her clothes. He had been secretly living in her closet for an unknown amount of time, just feet from where she slept every night. The police searched the rest of Madison's house, but her intruder was gone. It seemed that when Madison had screamed and run from the house, he had used the chaos to slip out the back and disappear into the night. But he had left plenty of evidence behind. In the nest, they found a prescription bottle with a name on it, Arthur Bennett. A quick database search revealed he was a 42-year-old transient with a record of trespassing and petty theft, and a sealed juvenile record for a stalking charge. 3 long and agonizing weeks later, the police caught Arthur Bennett. He was found sleeping in a stolen car 2 towns over, his grimy appearance a stark contrast to the clean suburban world he had invaded. When questioned, he confessed right away, recounting his actions in a flat, emotionless tone that chilled the seasoned detectives to the bone. He told them he had seen Madison moving into her new home and thought she looked nice. Being homeless and seeing the old house with its easy-to-miss vulnerabilities, he decided to move in. He calmly admitted to living inside her walls and attic for almost 2 months, watching her every move through the holes he had drilled. In his profoundly warped and delusional mind, he did not see anything wrong with what he had done. He explained to the police, with a disturbing lack of remorse, that he felt they were living together, that he had become a part of her life, an unseen partner sharing her home. His confession painted a picture not of a monster, but of a deeply disturbed and dangerously obsessive man, incapable of understanding the terror he had inflicted. He was eventually sentenced to prison for felony burglary and stalking, his name added to a list of predators. But for Madison, the story did not end with the sound of a gavel or a closing cell door. She never spent another night in the pale yellow bungalow. She simply could not. The house, once a symbol of her dreams and independence, was now irrevocably tainted. She hired a company to pack her belongings, unable to bring herself to step back inside. She sold the house at a significant loss, its once cheerful color now serving as a painful and constant reminder of the nightmare that had unfolded within its walls. The idea of sleeping in that bedroom, directly beneath the filthy nest where he had lived and watched her, was a torment she could not endure. The sanctuary had become a tomb of memories. She moved back to the bustling, anonymous city, choosing a modern, high-rise apartment building with a 24-hour doorman and a web of security cameras. It was a fortress of concrete and steel, the antithesis of her charming old house. But even with these layers of security, the feeling of being watched never truly left her. It became a permanent shadow in her life, a persistent hum of anxiety beneath the surface of her daily routine. The trauma had rewired her brain, leaving her with a lingering fear that turned every quiet moment into a source of potential dread. Arthur Bennett was in prison, but he still occupied a space in her mind. Madison's story, a harrowing composite pieced together from the threads of real-life horrors, forces us all to confront a difficult and unsettling truth. Our homes, our castles, are only as safe as their weakest, most overlooked point. The phenomenon of phrogging, while statistically rare, is devastatingly real. It preys on our most fundamental need for security, turning the one place on Earth where we should feel completely safe into the very source of our deepest fears. It is a crime that does not just steal property, but systematically dismantles a person's sense of reality and well-being, leaving behind scars that may never fully fade. The documented cases that form the backbone of this narrative prove that this is not merely an urban legend or a plot from a horror film. The chilling story of Daniel LaPlante, the teenager who terrorized a family from inside their walls, and the bizarre tale of Theodore Coneys, the Denver Spiderman who lived undetected in an attic for months after committing a murder, are stark reminders of this reality. These are not ghosts or monsters. They are human beings who exploit the hidden spaces in our homes, turning our sanctuaries into their secret observation decks. They prove that true horror does not always announce itself with a crash or a scream, but can exist in silence just inches away. The locks on our doors and the alarms on our windows are designed to keep dangers out. We place our faith in these simple mechanisms, believing they create an impenetrable barrier between our private world and the potential threats of the outside. But these defenses are rendered useless against a danger that does not need to break in, a danger that might already be hiding within. The Phrogger slips through the cracks of our awareness, exploiting our trust and our tendency to rationalize the unexplainable. They are a testament to the fact that the most terrifying threats are often the ones we never see coming. The ultimate terror of phrogging is the profound and permanent violation of that sacred space we call home. It makes you think twice about the small, unexplained things in your own life, doesn't it? That object you could have sworn you left in a different place, that faint, unfamiliar noise you wrote off as nothing more than the house settling. Madison's experience leaves all of us with one final, chilling question that echoes long after the story ends. How well do you really know the sounds, the smells, and the secrets of your own home?